Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Cap and Trade. I am your host, TexansCap. You can follow me on Twitter at TexansCap. If you prefer the written form, capandtrade.substack.com. Welcome into the live show, everybody. I'm really excited. Got a lot to get to tonight. Hopefully, our guests will be along here soon. But we got a lot to cover tonight, man. It's been a busy, 2 weeks now of free agency. So, it's and as always with the Houston Texans and Nick Caserio, they're always got a ton of signings going. So we'll kind of roll through some of those here shortly. Got a lot of different topics to get through. If you got any questions, comments, throw them up on the board. We'll get to as much as we can. Good to see you, Dalton. Love the support, man. Appreciate it. John, good to see you as always, man. Good to see you. And it looks like our guest just rolled into the room, so we'll get Jason on here in just a second. Good evening. Hey, Moderate Texan. Good to see you, bud. But yeah, so a lot to get to. We'll get Jason on here. So Jason is the owner of overthecap.com and someone that I lean on routinely. So we'll bring him on here. Good evening, sir.
All right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
There we go. We'll see if this actually holds up. This Optimum stuff over here it's been a nightmare the last couple of months. We were supposed to get everything switched over. And they showed up, and the guy said, "We think we can do it, but not today." I said, "All right."
Oh no, and you're stuck with like one internet provider or something.
Yeah, pretty much. We're in one of those areas where you're just locked into everything for cable, internet, and pretty much everything else.
Yeah,
such is life.
Yeah, no, great. Good to finally chat with you, man. I was trying to figure back how long that we've been doing this back and forth, and how long we've been helping out on Over the Cap, and we just never had a chat like this for I don't know how many years now it's been, but it's good to finally at least get a face-to-face.
Yeah, it's been quite some time. That's pretty much the way that I guess a lot of this stuff works. You kind of make embeds and you talk a lot on Twitter and email, and you don't do as much stuff kind of in person or anything like that. I'm going to say the only other time I probably spoke at all, maybe a Twitter Spaces. You might have asked a question or something during that when I ran a Twitter Spaces once or twice.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
A while ago, and I would say that's probably about the only time. Nick, I've never met Nick in person either.
Really?
Spoken with him on the phone once or twice.
Yeah.
Brad, who's helped out. Obviously, I've met Brad through Tulane competitions and going out to the combine and some things like that. But yeah, a lot of the people through the years who have done stuff on OTC. It's a lot of times it's just maybe one phone call in there and a lot of emailing and a lot of Twitter stuff that goes on.
I mean, I've always appreciated, the generosity that you provide, and you've always been grateful and willing to answer my 18 million questions over the probably the last 6-7 years of, because I started doing this in 2011, and that's probably about the time I started bugging you. So we're probably 10 years into our relationship at this point.
It's probably around that. I would guess that was the early social media days. There was a couple of us that did the salary cap stuff, so it was it was easy to meet people, and start to talk with them about these kind of things, and kind of get into it. So it's been kind of cool with the kind of people that you meet, and the different impacts, I guess, that we have doing the stuff at OTC, and just helping people out understand the stuff a little bit better.
Yeah, no, I've forged some great relationships, not only with our chats, with Ian and Brian and Miguel and a lot of the other folks, Ken Ingalls, who does this for the Packers, and you meet different people, and they're all just super smart and just willing to absorb as much information as they can get their hands on it. Sean Borman up in Minnesota just loves asking questions, and I try to answer as best as I can, and it's just fun. And I still, to this day, learn new things, and it's always fun to learn something new, even though however long we've been doing this. But so anyhow, so we'll move on. So like I said, I appreciate you coming on. Got a lot to get to. We'll try to squeeze in what we can. And like I said, if you're watching, listening in, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. If you got any questions, throw them up on the board. We'll try to get to what we can. But free agency, big old dud. Now, quantity wise, as always with Houston, with Nick Caserio, quantity wise, I think he may have jumped back into the lead with his latest round of signings with another 4 signings this past 24 hours. And keeps me busy. I do miss the golden days of Chris Olsen and Rick Smith and their contract simplicity, and Nick loves incentives and per gamers and everything in between. So keeps me on my feet. But yeah, it was a big old dud, and that was to be expected. You know, this free agency class was talked about for weeks and months leading up, that this was just going to be a pretty quiet one by all means comparison. And I don't know if that's a function of this specific group, or if it's just the teams are starting to catch up on their salary cap from the COVID, from the pandemic years, and they're able to retain more players. Maybe it's a mixture of both, but do you have any insight or thoughts of why this one was just so bad by comparison to previous years?
I think it's a combination of both, and I think it probably just pairs up with a year that happened to be kind of a downdraft. You know, the guys they wanted to keep, you know, those players got extended, or, you know, I guess a couple of the guys got that franchise tag, and even that was limited this year. But I think that's kind of what it boils down to. You know, you didn't have a lot of the guys, I guess, at the top of the draft. Now, you know, a lot of this was tied in with, like, you know, Darnold becoming a free agent, Baker Mayfield becoming a free agent. None of those guys panned out. You know, you have a year where it's Geno Smith and Daniel Jones is like your top guys, and then they get locked up, you know, a day or two before free agency starts, or the legal tampering, whatever you want to call that nonsense period starts. You know, so it was just not a lot of players out there. And I think the other thing too that made it a lot less exciting is you didn't have at all any of, like, the skill positions. Like, you didn't have any, like, not even
no
wide
receivers.
receiver.
Yeah.
You know, for as much as, you know, I might have picked on the Christian Kirk contract, the Galladay contract, and obviously Galladay didn't work out at all. That turned out to be a historic all-time bad signing. At the time, at least that's kind of like a big deal. You know, it was a big name player, 18 million a year, I think is.
And he was like right off the bat too. I mean, it was quick into free agency.
So, you know, you didn't have that. I think I would have been interested to see what would happen if the running backs had actually made it. I think, you know, the Jones getting that deal done at the last second that made Barkley get tagged, I think that actually took out a pretty interesting storyline. I don't know what would have happened. My guess is he probably would have gotten a deal, but or at least, you know, would have gotten signed somewhere, but not like a big contract. But you know, losing him, that was a tough one, and you didn't have any other guys. And, you know, there are a couple players that are cut. You get cut, and nobody really cares, you know, about those players. Like Ezekiel Elliott got cut. So putting out on Twitter, oh, he's choosing between his team. He's not choosing between any teams. Like, maybe there's a team that'll make him an offer, but he's not choosing. It's not like it's not like he's got this list of 5 teams and he's like, oh, I'm going to choose which one I'm going to go to. You know, like, that's the kind of the stuff
his agent is calling
those.
Those are the 5 teams that his agent's been calling and bugging.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, but it was a quiet one, but, you know, with Houston specifically, I think some of them, you know, we tabulate some of the re-signings as UFA signings, but if you pull all those in, I think Houston's up at around 16 or 17 now. They were at 14.
Every year.
And number one, once again, and I kind of wanted to get, you know, Nick just won't flat out answer the question of why 1 and 2 year deals. He's handed 1 3-year contract out in his now 3rd offseason with Houston, and that was for a punter. Now, we're not talking extensions like Tunsil, you know, who got a 3-year extension, but just straight up free agency contracts. He's handed out nothing but 1 and 2 year deals, and he won't come out and just say why or what it is. I mean, it's just how they're valuing their players, whether it's a commitment. Maybe I kind of wanted to get your opinion. Is there an injury protection standpoint that they're looking at this from? I mean, I know some of it's from, you know, if you're continuing to do this 1-year deals over and over, you can't play in the compensatory pick game, more or less, if you're having to do this many signs over and over and over. But it gives you that roster adjustability, you know, year to year. You can adjust quickly because you don't have as many players under contract. But is there anything that I'm missing from a liability standpoint or some other angle that why Houston continues to just do 1 and 2 year deals?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe you could look at them and say, okay, well, you're being a little bit on the cheap side. You figure if you do a 2-year deal, maybe your guarantees aren't going to be as high as if you try and sign a guy for a 3-year deal. But for the most part, I was kind of thinking about this, like, because you see this year after year, like the first year, you kind of understood why Houston was going in there and, they just needed to fill up a roster. But this is every year now. I mean, it's like 16, 17, 18 players, short-term contracts, cheap players. Who's the most expensive this year? Is it Rankins?
Yeah.
And he's what, like 9.5, something like that. One
max,
year deal?
max. Yeah. I think it ended up coming in a little bit lower than that.
Okay. So, I mean, they don't, it's all like the 1 year. I don't even remember how many players it was, and it ended up averaging out to like 2.2 million player. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, the first year was the quantity was, and then on an average per signing was just some ridiculous number. But it's at least this year, I think the tier level of signings has increased. Like the past 2 years, it's been scraping the barrel, bargain. Yeah, a little bit. I'm not saying it's a big jump, but I think the fans are acknowledging that they've been a little more aggressive in the type of players like Dalton Schultz, Sheldon Rankins.
Yeah, I think they I think they might have benefited this year from the fact that the market was down overall. So you didn't get those guys getting bid up. So that allowed them to kind of come in there. But I don't know. I kind of feel like he runs the team the way that New England ran the team for a long time. And New England was able to do that because they had a great coach. They had the great quarterback. Houston has neither of those. Houston has a new coach every year. They should have a new quarterback every year, the way things have gone. So I don't know. It's like that seems to be the way that they fill the team. Like, oh, we've got these hard workers. We've got, Rex Burkhead coming in. I mean, that's not going to help you, get anywhere. Even this year, like I don't really even get what they're doing at wide receiver. They bring in Robert Woods. I know that's a nice veteran presence. They go Brown. I mean, they're going to probably have the slowest receivers. So,
yeah, that's been the biggest thing now is like, whether it's, and I know you're not a big draft guy, but a lot of people are talking about wide receiver in the draft for Houston, and I'm more of they need a burner, but I don't know that wide receiver is going to be a big first round pick for them. But yeah, I mean, they're going to shift around their wide receiver group. They moved Brandon Cooks, which we'll get into that here in a second. But I think this might be, I'm hoping as a fan that this is the last year that we see these large free agency groups, because this will be 2 years of big free draft classes. Last year they made, I think, like 9 picks. They have 12 picks on the books this year. They probably won't make them all again. He'll trade up some, but you hope that now you've got 2 years into those draft picks. You're still going to maybe a third, maybe another free agency class before, and you get but at some point those draft classes should start maintaining the roster to where you're not having to go out and sign 18, 25 players in free agency every year. So hopefully that's the goal, is to build through the draft. And it was a crappy situation for him to come into with the Watson situation. Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby left the salary cap and the roster just completely upside down. And it took them, so far 2 years to get out of that hole. I think there was probably a slightly quicker path to get there, but and they didn't have any cash concerns. I mean, they're well above the 90% spending for this going into this third year, and they're going to be well above it now at this point. So, yeah, I mean, I understand your viewpoint. It's hard to know exactly what their goal is, but they seem to have a little more, instead of just signing a bunch of dudes, hoping that 2 or 3 of them work out and we can end up re-signing them. They seem to have a more pointed approach with some of the players that they're signing with, Jimmy Ward, Denzel Perryman, Sheldon Rankins, Dalton Schultz, which kind of surprised me. And it was interesting because the tight end market just completely fell apart. And, we'll just kind of see how it goes. But is there any, outside of Houston, is there any teams, just from a holistic standpoint, 30,000 foot view, that you liked what they did in free agency? And I know free agency is a crapshoot, but
Here, I mean, I think the Broncos did okay for themselves. I know they spent a lot of money, but I think they spent on certain positions that'll certainly at least attempt to help them on offense. That they try to solidify that offensive line. That's usually a little bit of a safer position. I think Detroit, some people, I don't know how Detroit's going to be as a team, but I thought they got some good value on a couple of the players that they brought in. Other than that, not really. I mean, Atlanta's like an oddball team to me. Like Atlanta brought in players that'll probably get to 8-8 this year, and maybe that's good enough to make the playoffs in that division. Long term, what they did makes no sense at all. It's like a lot of old players or older players that they brought in, not guys that kind of envision there for long term. Those were kind of the teams that I think kind of stood out as kind of getting better probably this year. But for the most part, again, it was just such a weak group. Like, not much.
Yeah,
much you can
for
really
what there
project out of it.
was. Yeah, I think Detroit is definitely probably my biggest favorite of what they did, and some of what Cleveland did. It was interesting to see a $7 million per year safety get a double bonus.
Cleveland's interesting. Like, so Cleveland is, Cleveland's a team whose defense, you like some of those players that they added. The contract structures at some point, though, were just way out there. I mean, you're at the double option, quadruple void year on a 3-year deal for every single player. Yeah. It's not like one guy. It's every single player on the team.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'm not sure if that strategy will work. I kind of think short term it might, only because you're going to have the salary cap rise, and I don't think the salaries are going to rise. Not right away. No, there's a couple agents there. It's not going to happen that way. Yeah. So you can probably get away in a couple of those years with carrying that kind of dead money from those player contracts that void out. But once everything kind of catches up, I think you probably have to back off that kind of strategy. But I guess we'll see. It's them and the Eagles kind of running that route, but it's Cleveland that really went over the top with it this year.
Yeah. No, that Thornhill contract last, because I ended up having to message you about it. I was like, this is two option bonuses in this low level deal. And speaking of void years, so Houston, they did it on the Sheldon Rankins deal. I feel like it's coming with the Dalton Schultz deal. Can I explain, kind of break down what are void years and what are they used for?
So, I think the easiest way to think about a void year is just a kind of buy on credit, the salary cap. I mean, that's really what it is. You're just throwing some fake contract years in there that are allowing you to dump salary cap charges based on the way the NFL is for signing bonus money kind of into these years that you never really have any intent of having that player under contract. It's just automatically going to void. He's going to become a free agent, and you're just deferring that cost to next year. So when you're kind of on the cap, and I think Houston is still, they've been kind of tight on the cap. It's okay to use. I think when you use it sparingly, or if you use it on the right positional players, I think it's perfectly fine to use. I think where you get into trouble is when you use it on every single player on the team, and you've got multiple contracts hitting at the same time. You just get kind of leveraged out on doing extensions for the players because of the amount of dead money that it might give you if you let certain players walk. So when you're talking about a 1-year deal, 2-year deal, it's probably not that big of a deal. When you're looking at someone like Dak Prescott on the Dallas Cowboys, they're completely leveraged out on that. Like he's basically just going to walk. He's going to walk into that office with a blank check and say, sign me for 60, 65 million a year or else, because of really what's gone on with that contract in the way they've structured it. So it'll be interesting to see if more teams do what Philadelphia does, where they're basically trying to get out of this by getting agents to agree to let the team June 1 their players instead of having to cut them. I thought that was pretty unique by them. And I kind of suggested doing something like that. We're going to get rid of Carson Wentz and think there'd be a sucker to trade for him. And there'd been 2 suckers to trade for him.
That's wild.
I thought they were going to do something like that with him. And then when they did those deals, for Alshon Jeffrey, and that was a defensive tackle. I forget what it was.
Yeah.
Malik Jackson, maybe. I can't remember.
Yeah,
it was just wow. I can't believe those players agreed to it. And,
yeah, because you have to do it. You have to do it before the end of the regular season.
Yeah. So you're basically telling them months in advance, look, you're gone. We have no intention of keeping you here, but it's really going to be a pain for our salary cap if we have to cut you like a normal cut. So can you just help us out by letting us June 1 you? And 20 years ago, that would have been a no. That would have been a, you know what? Negotiate my contract down. I'll be on roster next year for 1.5 million guaranteed, and I'll sit on the bench and I'll be happy to collect my 1.5. And now it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, why not? And I'm assuming that's just because the span of careers in the NFL is so short right now. So I think for the agents, it's more important to make sure you've got that really relationship with Howie or whatever GM it is, than probably doing what might necessarily be in the best interest of one particular client that you have, just because there's so much churn on these rosters, and you've got to deal with these GMs and their contract guys all the time. And, the player's career is very short. So maybe they get a little sacrificed in there, but it'll be neat to see if more teams pick up on that. The only other team that's done it really is New Orleans. They've done it out of necessity
at this point.
Yeah. And, Cleveland's used it, but Cleveland's done the trick where they just kind of use it ahead of time, where it's almost like it's just a void year in there. It's a little bit different than taking an existing contract and saying, please help us. And getting them to do it. So it'll be interesting to see if more teams follow suit on that.
Yeah, dude. And I think void years are coming down the pipeline for Houston because, like you said, they're getting a little tight on the cap, and they are getting tight on the cap again because they have a very big projected draft class. Upwards of $20 million in cap space when using the top 53 accounting for everything. And that's how the team views it. Cause I've heard Nick Caserio say it on 2 or 3 different occasions that, he's got a $20 million draft class to sign. So that's why I post my graphic the way I do. And it pulls kind of the same idea that you have, where you have the cap space and then an effective cap space. And it kind of puts things in perspective because people will see Houston's, they got $25 million in cap space. Yeah. Today, yes, they do, but is it really 25 million? No, because they have all these other things they need to account for in the next 2 or 3 months. So I think void years are coming, and maybe we'll get some new updates tomorrow. I feel like the PA is probably done with their free agency reports. It seems like there hasn't been one for.
Yeah, I think so. There was no interest on their end.
And they've already started. They've already started moving those contracts over into the system anyway. So that's what made me think that they were probably done. So Houston did have a big signing, though. Laramie Tunsil reset the market, $25 million per year. And is interesting. You mentioned with Dak Prescott, Tunsil, with the function of back-to-back restructures and having such a huge inflated cap number this year, had a ton of leverage to walk into that room. It's like, either you're going to have to trade me or you're going to have to extend me, because you're not going to have an offensive tackle with a $35 million cap hit on your roster. I don't care what your composition is like. And so the team have been moving towards that path, and it got done. Reset the market on many metrics, whether it's cash flows. I think the Trent Williams, one of the other deals, either Ronnie Stanley or Bakhtiari, or one of them's kind of left with him. But once he gets in that 3rd year, he starts really taking off. But what are your thoughts on that Laramie Tunsil situation?
It's just kind of what you said. He leveraged himself into a situation, really, both times. I mentioned it on Twitter. I said, he's like the low-key version of Kirk Cousins. And the Minnesota fans didn't like that. They're, you're always picking on Kirk. I'm like, that's not picking on him. That's actually giving him a compliment for, what he's been able to do. And it's that same kind of thing. He used the leverage of getting traded there for all those picks, which was kind of a crazy trade, to get that first contract that was just obscene, at the time. And it was only a 3-year deal. So you knew you were going to get re-upped again. And they had to restructure it because of all the cap issues. That just made it easier and easier and easier for him, where he can go in there and say, let's just do another 3-year deal. And probably the same thing is going to happen years from now, as long as he's healthy. He could probably land himself one last contract that'll reset the market. And, that's just incredibly impressive. From a player side, I think to be able to pull that feat off. And I think, I don't think enough people look at those kind of situations. And I know it's different position to position. But I think you get too caught up sometimes in certain metrics on these deals, especially when it comes to guaranteed options and stuff like that. And it's like, if you're at a position where you're top player and it's a position where you do play into your 30s, this is what you want to do as a player. You want to get those deals that are 3 years in length to where you can just keep going and going and going, kind of back pretty much every other year and going in there and saying, hey, redo this contract. And I think that kind of gets lost. People just focus on, oh, I can't believe he didn't get a fully guaranteed deal. This guy's making a fortune. It doesn't matter if Tunsil didn't get a fully guaranteed deal or whomever it might be. There's too much focus on that instead of the focus on how do you make the most money in, this little finite amount of time that you have to actually play professional football.
Yeah. And it's 60 million essentially guaranteed within 12 months of the deal. And once you get past, would that be 2025 going into his last year, you're back, like you said, you're back at the table again, looking for another extension. So is it fully guaranteed at signing? No. But if you look at it from an overall scope and length of back-to-back contracts under those structures, it's almost fully guaranteed effectively when you look at it in that holistic viewpoint. And I think he just, like you said, he played it perfectly. He didn't let them add void years and mess with any of the numbers. He just, agreed. They had, Houston puts automatic conversion rights in all their contracts. So, they did have to go sign new contracts, I think, just because they had to remove the language for they had in, I think he had the de-escalators in there in the beginning on his first contract. And I think it would have pulled it down below the P5 minimum and stuff like that after the restructure. So they had to sign new contracts, but he was very smart. St. Omni and his group didn't add on void years or anything like that. It was just straight conversions. And he just put himself and I've been saying it on here for weeks and months. People who listen know that he just levers the team into a corner, and he'll probably be able to do it again, like you said, in 2 more years. So
yeah, more power to him.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful situation for him. Great job by his crew. I mean, that group of advisors, I think they did. I think that was the same group who helped Roquan Smith. I think they've helped up a few other players, and definitely seem to be anti NFL Players Association. And hey, if find a way to make it work, I'm all for it. I don't really have a preference if they're certified, not certified, however it works. But it's good. It's good to see that. And I've talked to a couple of those folks, and they're actually very, very nice folks. So we'll move it over to your neck of the woods with Aaron Rodgers, and then Elijah Moore got traded today. Yep. And I saw a tweet, and I didn't quite get a chance to really digest it very much, but you were talking about playing with the numbers and seeing if Green Bay was going to take on some additional money. Kind of what were your thoughts on that tweet and just in the overall situation?
Yeah, I'm hoping to put something together on that to flesh that out a little bit more. But I think, when you look at Rodgers' contract and you're basically paying him $60 million for this year, there's no commitment to play beyond this year. There's really no long-term commitment at all. Even if he wanted to keep playing, his contract effectively only runs one more season after this. So, you're looking at a position where the highest paid player, which Rodgers right now, is valued at about, $50 million a year. In a sense, you're already underwater on a trade. You're paying $60 million for a $50 million player. And it's not like the market's going to change because his contract's so short. Like you can kind of yourself, like, let's say he was signed for 50 and let's say he was 32 years old instead of what he is 38, 39. When you could play 5 years, say, okay, well, he's signed right now for 50. Well, next year the top guy will be 52. Then the next year is 55. Then it's going to be 57. Now he's kind of a bargain price at 50 a year. You're just going in and doing a 1-year deal for $60 million. And so he's probably overpriced relative to the market itself. He's probably overpriced to really what he's going to give you on the field right now. The only way that works out is if you get the Super Bowl out of it. I mean, that's realistically, that's the only way that really makes any sense. As a fan, the Jets have been full for 10, 15, however many years it's been now, 13 years. As a fan, yeah, I'll trade in that 1 year. And if it's a wild card loss, I'd probably just take it for the next years of whatever kind of pain it's going to be. But I think that contract, the money that's there this year, or even over 2 years, there's just no value in that. It's not like, Russell Wilson's a bad example because Russell Wilson is terrible. I mean, he was just so bad last year. But at least if you looked at that, they brought in 2 old years on that contract that were, 27 million, 28 million, something like that they could bake into a new deal. So in their mind, they're getting a $49-50 million player over the next 4 years for probably about $40 a year in investment. Plus they're going to save a little bit of money on the draft picks they give up and everything else. So that can lessen the blow a little bit of the draft picks that you give up. So you can at least make a case, I think, for those kind of trades. But I don't know, when you're talking about a guy that's under contract for a year at this kind of salary, I just can't see how, if you pull yourself back from like the fan that's in you, I can't see how you can look at that and this makes any kind of sense at all for a franchise to even be considering giving a high pick to bring on this contract and get these guys out of, really just a bad deal that they signed when they got bullied by Rodgers over the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. So the Elijah Moore trade, and it was interesting because I saw Nick tweet about it and kind of did APY just on the last 2 years of his deal, compare and using the draft trade tool that y'all have on OTC, and they kind of aligned up. So, and they lined up really right on the bat when you look at what was traded and look at Moore's trade and the projected APY return on the draft pick coming back. Do you think that was Green Bay telling New York, hey, we need a draft pick in this area, and they were able to find a piece to move it off and get that return back as to help facilitate the trade?
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe one of the discussions the Jets had with Green Bay was like, hey, do you want Elijah Moore? And they said no. So they probably had to find a third team in there to get a pick that would be kind of in that range. Elijah Moore had fallen out of favor, I think, with the coaching staff last year. They really weren't using him. He blew up. I forget which week it was where he started demanding a trade. And, that just, I think, made the situation probably worse. And I think they just looked at it like, okay, if we can get a pick, it gives us a pick that maybe we can go to Green Bay with, and we're going to sell this as we flipped Elijah Moore for Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I think that's basically what's going to be the end result of all of it. I don't think the Jets had any real thought like, oh, well, we really need to upgrade a third rounder to a second rounder. I think it's all just based on what Green Bay is talking about and the Jets just making sure they have, some of those pieces to get it done.
Okay. So, and speaking on trades, so one other thing I wanted to, it's kind of a segue into 2 points, and we'll get to the second one here in a minute. But so Brandon Cooks was traded with Houston, and most of my listeners are very familiar with that situation and the information I've reported on it. But so they took on $6 million. They got back a fifth this year, a sixth next year. And, I'd kind of mentioned before the trade happened that I felt like taking some money down from Cooks's guaranteed $18 million salary in line with what the market was showing on signings. We saw Lazard, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Jacoby Myers were the 3 top wide receivers signed in free agency, at $8, $9, $10 million a year. Cooks is probably around their level, maybe slightly better. So if you can get that salary for this year, at least to kind of commiserate with that value, and that's what ended up happening. But are you surprised that the draft capital return was still day 3 picks while taking on that additional additional $6 million on their side, on Houston's side?
No, because it was still a lot that Dallas was going to have to pay for Cooks, and I'm going to assume that Houston did not know that Cooks was going to redo that deal right away. I don't know that for a fact, obviously, but I think Dallas could have sold this as like, hey, we're just getting this guy for a year because there's no way we're going to have him next year. There's no way we're going to pay him $18 million to be on the team next year, or whatever his salary was.
He took an $8 million pay. He took an $8 million pay cut in 2024 with the
So I don't know if Houston he was going to do that because if the contract looked like that, I think they probably could have gotten something a little bit more for picking up the $6 million. But I think that's kind of the ballpark area if you're going to pick up that size of a contract. I think that's the ballpark as to what you get back in return, like a 4th round pick, or in this case a 5 and a 6, I guess, the following year. I think it was fine for Houston. It's like you can either pay 6 or you could pay the full 18 and have them just be completely unhappy. Like last year. So I think this was better for him. You save $12 million, you bring in a couple of draft picks. I think that it's one of those trades. It's probably a decent trade for both sides. For where they're at. But yeah, I wasn't really surprised that they didn't get much more for him. I think when you get these guys that are essentially on like a third that third contract area, their career. I think the value just drops tremendously. Like you look at like Jalen Ramsey, you look at some of those players, once you're considered to be declining and you've got the big money that's still attached to it, I think you just kind of start losing your value when it comes to the trades.
Yeah. And he wanted out. Houston was ready to move on. And so I think they were just more than willing to facilitate whatever they needed to do to get it done. And, like you said, $12 million savings. That's one thing that I try to preach is, at the end of the day, cash is king. Salary cap is just accounting of the cash you spend. And $12 million is $12 million. And that's cash that the team can reallocate elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, there's ways you can spin it. I mean, you can look in free agency and you can say, well, they wouldn't have been able to get Rankin and, one other player, choose, well, in their case, choose 2 players that are making like $2 million a year or something like that. That's kind of getting rid of Brandon Cooks allows you to do 2 or 3 different things, on the team. And so I think that's a net positive, but, everybody gets focused on that player. Oh, I can't believe they're getting rid of, so-and-so. And, then the guy gets moved, and then the next year, it really ends up not being that big of a loss.
It's just a sore subject with fans, especially with how things went down at the trade deadline. I'm not gonna rehash that nonsense, but there's a lot of crazy rumors with that one. But with the trade and draft picks, Brad and I, we've got a running list of instances where draft picks were basically essentially bought with cash. Trading draft picks for cash, like the Brock Osweiler deal from way back when, and so on and so forth as these deals go through. It's weird that the league will allow that, but they won't allow, like we talked about the other day, with when New Orleans was trying to facilitate with the third team with Jadeveon Clowney a few years ago, where they were going to have him sign with another team, and then they send a second round pick or whatever to buy that contract off of that team, and the league basically stepped in and said, no, you can't trade cash. Do you have any thoughts on trading cash or draft picks? And I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any real correlation in value that we've been able to find yet. I think we got like 14 or 15 examples, and it seems to be driven just on that market situation, the position value, contract value. So there's we haven't been able to come out and say 4th round pick is worth $4.5 million, 5th round pick is this, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like with the cap that's going to be continuing to grow over the next few years, I wonder if that may see some of that more often than not. I don't know. It just kind of comes and goes, and it just sneaks in, and then you get 2 or 3 of them, and then you don't see it for another 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. Only because kind of when you get to some of these trades, sometimes you still get hung up like, well, there is still some value in this player. How much that value is, who knows? And so sometimes it's hard to separate the fact that there is a little bit of value and then there's a lot of value in the money that's being, picked up. Von Miller last year and then 2 years ago, I guess, was that trade.
Yeah, 2 years.
And and that ended up being what, a 2 and a 3. And it's almost like, how do you separate out? Like, there's a value that you're trading for the player. Maybe that's the 3. Was the money worth the 2? Was the player worth the 2? The money worth the 3? And when you get players like that, it becomes pretty hard. Osweiler, that one was a straighter one, though. I think Cleveland thought they could flip him. So I think
they tried.
Cleveland completely misjudged what that was. Probably the biggest one that was just a draft pick was that Talib when he was on IR. I think he got
Talib from, 4.5
Rams to Miami.
Yeah, they got a fifth rounder pick? And they got Talib in a 7th for a 5th rounder on $4.2 million in cash. I've got my list pulled up now.
Yeah. And so, I mean, to me, that was the most pure, like, this guy has no value anymore as a football player. Like, he's done. That is like the most, that's the easiest one to look at and say, okay, this amount of money should give you this if we, if you're tracking this stuff and you're trying to, come up with any kind of, any kind of theories as to how it might work. But some of the other ones, it's kind of hard to untangle. It's like the Jared Goff, the part with Matt Stafford. Everyone's like, oh, they gave 2 first-round picks for Matt Stafford. No, they didn't give 2 first-round picks for Matt Stafford. Maybe they gave 1. There's a value in there to those guys taking on that money that the Rams didn't want to eat. They couldn't get rid of it. So, it just hard with those trades to kind of figure that part out as to, what was the value of the player, and then what value of the cash, and then, how does it come up with it? So I think we need to see more ones like that Talib one where it's just strictly guys who can't play anymore. And it's just like, okay, you're picking up the guaranteed salary for this player. What is that worth? I think you need more of that. And then we could start to get more of an idea.
Yeah, because I think most of the other ones I have on my list, like when Houston traded Clowney to Seattle, and it was basically a $14 million year, but Houston took on $7 million and ended up getting a 3rd round for it. But there was still some value with Clowney at the time. And I've got, probably, I think about 14 on this list. But like you said, that's a great point. And that's something Brad and I need to talk a little bit further about, that Talib one, because he was on IR, I can't remember what list he was on at the time. Was definitely not a player that was going to be playing. That was just straight up purchase of a draft pick. Yeah. So have to keep tracking it, see if we can get some more data on that. Maybe in a few more years, we'll have more data on that and can maybe derive something from it. I'm not sure we'll ever be able to, because there's just, like you said, every situation is different. Teams,
the league should just let you trade cap space. I don't really understand it.
Yeah, that I would love. A buddy of mine have mentioned that multiple times, and that would just be fascinating to me. That
I don't know why they don't do it. It doesn't make any sense. Like even the part talked about before with the, the facilitating a signing. Like I still don't understand how they block that. Like I don't see any rules that would prevent it from happening. And we've seen players traded that first year that they sign. So I don't really get, why that would be the case, unless it was just literally like, I'm going to sign you and trade you the next day. Only because I know with like all these rules with roster bonuses and all that, they want to see like a 72-hour waiting period or maybe it's a 5-day waiting period or something like that, to where they consider it like signing bonus, like they consider it guaranteed or something at that point.
Yeah.
So maybe, something like that, but I can't really see why you can't do that as long as the player agrees to it. Now I could see if it's a situation where, the player doesn't agree to it, but to me, that's more of a players association issue with something that you would collectively bargain. Where you would have that discussion over the point of like, okay, you can only trade a free agent if the free agent agrees to be traded. And they have those type of rules in there for, players who've been franchise tagged and, offers matched and that kind of stuff. So I would think it'd be pretty easy to put that same thing in there about just a standard free agent. And then that allows you to do that. Like, okay, we're going to pay his signing bonus. Then you go to the team you want to go to.
Yeah.
So hopefully someone will actually test it versus just asking them. So next time they just go and do it. See what
do
happens.
it and let it and see if management council signs off on it. Yeah, that's definitely. I'm all for it. Maybe somebody will do it. One thing I wanted to ask you about, change of subjects here. So the draft chart values, and I have I think I like 9 of them now, but I use. There's so many of them, but so I usually would reference Rich Hill's is who I like, and then I know the Jimmy Johnson one is outdated, but that's still a valid point to look at. And then yours and Brad's, and the numbers always come up a little bit higher, a little bit different scale with yours compared to Rich Hill's and Jimmy Johnson's or PFF or anybody else. Can you explain to me why that is? It seems like it seems to have more value in the day 2, day 3 pick area, and there's not as much of a decay as compared to some of the other charts.
Yeah, when we calculated everything, and what we did was all based on raw data. It's all based on the contracts that players signed after the rookie deal expired. So when you actually see what those 7th rounders in general sign for, 6th rounders, 5th rounders, and then you go all the way up to the 1st round and you see how many first rounders, I don't know if flop is the right word, but certainly don't live up to that billing, and start kind of plotting these things out, you'll see that very steep decline that's there from Jimmy Johnson's chart really doesn't exist in the NFL. It's nowhere near that exponential decay that his has, which is basically you've got incredible value in like the first 7 picks and maybe 10 through 15. And then it's as if the rest of the league, the rest of the draft is terrible.
Right.
So that's really the main reason why. And I know the Hill chart, that's really just based on what the actual, returns have been, on these trades. And I think that, still that Jimmy Johnson trade chart is probably a big framework that's used, and it gets adjusted up and down a little bit, which is how you get the Rich Hill chart. And I think that's why that's probably pretty valid for probably seeing how these trades actually come down. In terms of value, the trading down a couple spots, and picking up extra picks. I mean, you should just think about it logically. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, when you get into these drafts, just talking about the top of the draft, and you go through all the 8 million different mock drafts that are out there, and all these different player rankings and everything else, there's a lot of guys who one group is going to have as like the 4th best player, another group is going to have that guy as the 10th best player. Those guys are all going to be available in kind of like that similar range of picks. So if you can drop from 4 to 8, 4 to 9, and you pick up that extra pick somewhere, you're probably going to get almost the same quality player as you would at number 4. You just don't get as many guys to kind of choose from. And, even when we look historically at some of these great players, like Aaron Donald, the top pick in the draft? No. Was J.J. Watt the top pick in the draft? No. All these guys that have had these great careers, often, it's not the top pick. Now, it's different if you have a quarterback who's sitting there, to get picked number 1, number 2. That's obviously a lot more valuable at that point because those guys are not available anywhere else in the draft. But, there's just a lot of good talent in the back end of that draft for, filling out the depth of teams and, these guys that go into free agency and do sign these deals that are worth, $2 million, $2.5 million, $3 million. There's value in that. Even if they're just sticking on a minimum salary, there's value in that. But the Johnson charts kind of just treat those as throwaway picks, as if there's no difference between that and the UDFA pool. And I don't really been the case at all. Historically, when you start looking at the success of the draft. Now, maybe it was different when they put that chart together. The league was very different back then. I think at that point in time, it was probably a little bit harder sometimes for some of the younger guys to break in because the coaches really love, some of these veterans that were there for a long period of time. But now, you churn through the veterans and you just try out all these guys that you get drafted, and they get a lot more opportunities, I think, to at least prove that they can play.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you end up generating a lot of value from those type of players, especially round 2, round 3, I think is where teams can really create a ton of value for their roster for the, not only for the rookie deal, but just even the rookie contracts themselves. The dollar value on it has such a strong decay once you get past the first like 5 picks. That pick like 18 through 75 is where a team can really, really, really find almost surplus value on those players if they hit those draft picks. So
yeah, the rookie scale basically follows that Jimmy Johnson chart.
Yeah,
the signing bonuses that were there, that's basically what they followed, and it led to those big declines. It's like you have a guy at 32, and I know teams go crazy about having that option year. It's like I have a guy at 32. I could pay millions less for the guy at 33. Is there a difference between 32 and 33 in performance? No. It's basically the same players. Yeah, you get them way cheaper.
Yeah, that with the way the 5th-year option is now under the new CBA, I don't know that teams are going to be quite as willing to jump up into that top 32 or top 31 this year to get a player to ensure you get that 5th-year option. I don't know if
it's probably only worth it if it's a quarterback. It's probably the only position where it's worth it to have that 5th year where you just keep your fingers crossed and you pick it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I think that's about all I had. You make a decision on your Twitter 2-factor authentication?
I did sign up for Twitter Blue. That was
I was going to say
I did to keep it, and then of course after I did that, I got an email from somebody telling me how you can do it without signing up for it. So now I have to see if there's anything useful with Twitter Blue. So the only thing I found useful, I don't even know if it's useful. There's like a delay to sending my tweet out, so I can run in and edit them. And I guess there actually is time, like maybe you can edit them for like an hour or something like that. I don't know. I haven't. I'll keep my my spelling errors and stuff probably in there. I won't pick them up to edit them, but I'll see if there's anything useful for my $80 or whatever I just paid to Elon Musk to keep Twitter going.
Yeah, because like if you have an iPhone, in your passwords in your keychain, it'll actually do the code for you, and you can do it that way without having to use the text message 2-factor. And it's they find ways. So it's funny. So Brooks Cabina, who works for the Houston Chronicle here in Houston, his account got hacked about 3 weeks ago, and it was a Bitcoin person, and it was a Bitcoin avatar, Digi something or whatever. But I was texting with him about it, of what happened, and the person who hacked his account actually was texting him from a number that looked like Twitter support. And so basically they were trying to reset his account. They were texting him the security messages, and it looked like it was coming from Twitter. So he thought it was this 2-factor authentication. He's answering the questions. And then that's how they got into his account, faking his 2-factor authentication as a text message. And I was like, that's pretty clever. I mean,
it's creative.
You think of hacking as like there's all this crazy code. No, they're just social engineering to get into your accounts. And so
that's pretty good. But
he finally got it.
I gave in.
Oh man, now I get to say, "Oh, you bought a blue check mark."
I do. I do. I guess at some point it's going to say it'll say that, right? I don't know. I think it still says a legacy verified account right now.
Maybe it'll.
I think that's what it says. So, but yeah,
if they get some more benefits to it, I mean, other than having additional character length and editing tweets, because I have typos left and right, and I get mad at myself when I see them. But then I would consider paying for it. But today it's just, I don't see for as many other subscriptions and things I pay for, I've got to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like, this is a bridge too far. I can't pay for this.
So I'm one of the suckers. So I'll give some feedback on if it's useful at all. My guess is it will not be, but at least for the time being, I can keep two-factor authentication there for a little bit of time.
Good. So hopefully Jason's account doesn't get messed with again. It's been a long time since that happened to you. I've been fortunate enough.
Yeah, that was like 2013, 2014. Yeah. I don't even remember. It was a long time ago. And I can still remember when I logged in or when I saw my profile, and it was all Arabic, I think. And who knows what it was about. But their stuff was so bad then. I guess just their security in general. I just went to another computer. I guess I had never closed it. A tab.
Oh, you were still like cached login.
And so it just let me go back in. It was like, all right, I'll change my password. I'll put my profile picture back and I'll kick this guy off from it. And that was how I got back in, because Twitter support was pretty much awful back then. I'm sure it's even worse now. It's to try and get your accounts back when that stuff happens.
So Brooks, he after like 2 weeks, he got his account back. But he could not change the screen name, not your Twitter handle, but the screen name or his avatar for like another 2 weeks. So you see these tweets about football stories and his articles and breaking news and all this stuff. And it's a Bitcoin avatar saying DigiCon something. So we picked on him forever about it. And then he finally got it changed back like a week ago. And we're like, no, Digi's dead. No, but he said it was like they wouldn't let him, like he had to submit like all these things to like Twitter support to prove that it was his account, like picture and all this stuff, and it was just wild. And I'm like, I would just given up the account at that point, but I understand he has a big following and all that stuff. But I just
it's tough to rebuild that kind of stuff. So, but for me it was easy because Twitter was just so bad, I guess, back then with the security stuff that it was, I guess, easy to get hacked. But if you were lucky to just never turn certain things off on your computer, you backdoor yourself right back in and take it back.
You got time for one question?
Yeah, sure.
So, Unexpected Truth, who listens to the show religiously, is dead cap the end all be all? Like, is there a way to spread out the damage, or team just has to eat it?
Well, eventually you have to eat it.
It's a sunk cost. It's just how you can get it allocated across the cap.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, so I ran a study on this a couple of years ago. Basically, taking on dead money is a good thing, right? Because if you have dead money, it means you took some risks, at least in what you were doing, because you can take risks to build a football. You can't just be what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did for years, or what the Raiders tried to do for years, where, you use no signing bonuses. And it's like, well, we never have dead money. It's like, you had dead money. It was just buried in all that active salary that you had for those players that you cut. So instead of being able to maximize your roster in those years, so you could, wave your hands and say no dead money, you probably weren't able to sign 1, 2 players. The problem is when you get into those excessive levels of dead money, which these days, I don't know if that means like 50 million a year. I'd have to see where that's relative to the cap right now. But there is a point where it does become prohibitive, for you to build a competitive team. And some of that, and this is one of the hard things of parsing through that data, though, too, is that some of those teams did that intentionally. Like you go back and team like the Dolphins, the Dolphins took a roster that was not good. I mean, it was probably like a 6-win kind of roster, and they were like, we're just going to rip the Band-Aid off. That's a little bit different than, say, the Saints, who just carry a lot of dead money from, the way that they structure their stuff. So, it's a little bit hard to go through that way, but the teams that take a bunch of dead money and they think it's going to, reset the clock and get them in better shape, it usually doesn't work at all. That's one of the things that I found. The only teams that got through that were the Buffalo Bills, and they were getting through it even before Josh Allen turned into a good quarterback. So I can't say it's just because of that. And the other one is the Saints, who, really got through it because they had that one draft class. It was awesome.
Yeah.
And was that 2017?
Yeah.
That was how they finally got through it after they went. I think they had so much dead money for a 3-year period equaled the unadjusted cap for one full year. That's how much took on. They had structured their deals and the contracts they had done. That was the era of like the Jairus Byrd signing, Junior Gillette, you know, they just didn't work out, that stuff. Colby Fleener, I think, was on those teams. I mean, it was just
Colby Fleener. Oof.
Yeah, it was just one bad deal after another, and nothing of the bad deals ended up working out good. Sometimes those deals don't look that bad. The players work out. In their case, even ones that look good did out, and they just got messed up.
Yeah, and to put a bow tie on it, I mean, in certain cases there are ways to spread out those cap, and like we kind of mentioned it in the beginning, how Philadelphia can do that under certain situations with the June 1 or things like that. But it's a sunk cost. It's coming due at some point. It's just sometimes you can build your contract structure to spread it out, and sometimes it's just going to come all in one bill. It's just coming one way or another, and there's no way of getting out of it. It's just how you can get it allocated across your salary cap over X number of years. And I need to go back and look, because I remember you wrote an article looking at dead money and playoff success or reaching the play, or the percentages of reaching the playoffs or things like that. But, you know, I think like this year, I think 15% of your cap of being dead money is around 33. So I think usually that 15 to 20% number is a decent ballpark at the end of the day of a dead money percentage that's not overly excessive, but shows that, like you said, you're taking some chances, and not everything's going to work out. Like I said in the very beginning, free agency is a crapshoot. So very rarely do you get that return on that investment. Very rarely do they extend out more than 1 or 2 years. And hey, maybe that's why Houston does 1 or 2 year deals, because free agency deals rarely last that long. They're not Jonathan Joseph, where they turn into 9 years of excellent service. So I think that's about all I had tonight, Jason. I really appreciate the time. I enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully things will start calming down here fairly soon, and then we'll get ramped back up for the draft. And if you're not following
little summer break,
summer break will be the good time. I'll try to get away myself as well. If you're not following Jason, it's at Jason_OTC. The website is overthecap.com. And Jason, I appreciate it, sir.
Anytime, man.
All right. Well, everybody, make sure you hit subscribe. Make sure you like, do all those wonderful things. Helps the algorithm. I promise I wouldn't say that word again, but I said it. So everybody have a good evening. And with that, we will shut it down. Thank you.